Everywhere across the globe, you'll find squid getting washed ashore. It could be a few, or it could be dozens, even hundreds, with stretches of coastline sometimes covered in them for miles. But despite the urge to help them, it's best not to throw the squid back into the water. For years now, this has been happening along the coast of Sakhalin. As soon as fall sets in, thousands of Japanese flying squid end up washed ashore, creating a whole graveyard of mollusks. But why does this happen? Two main factors, migration and weather conditions. And soon you'll also learn why they shouldn't be tossed back into the ocean. For those who forget to hit the like button, do it right now before you forget. All right, let's keep going. Throughout much of the year, Japanese flying squid stay in the southern part of the Sea of Japan. But when summer rolls around, they make a feeding migration journey up to the Tatar Strait, which lies between Eurasia and Sakhalin, as the surface waters warm up. By late September and the first half of October, you'll find most of them hanging out in the northern part of the Tatar Strait. As autumn sets in, typically towards the end of October, squid start their journey back down south for the winter and breeding season. The squid's journey south is usually pretty swift. By the first half of November, they've vanished from these parts. Every now and then, squid decide to stick around a bit longer, not heading south until the middle of November. Why? Well, who knows what goes through their minds, right? Regardless of their choices, there are times when the water temperature drops suddenly. It's comfortable for squid only in the summer, but autumn cyclones bring rapid cooling. And by rapid, I mean really fast, like within just a few hours. That's the main reason squid end up dead. If the water cooled down slowly, they might stand a chance, but the way it happens, squid just can't handle the cold. They either die fast or get frozen and washed ashore, weakened. And then the lack of water finishes them off. Now, someone might argue that squid live deep down where it's chilly, so they must be used to the cold. And you know what? You're not quite wrong, but we're talking about those massive Humboldt squid. They're usually hanging out anywhere from 656 to 2,297 feet deep in the Northwest Pacific Ocean, where, yeah, it's pretty chilly. However, when it comes to Japanese flying squid, the deepest they occasionally venture is about 1,640 feet. They just aren't built for the cold down there. When it gets cold, squid slow down their metabolism regardless of their size, which leaves them very sluggish, almost like they're fainting. This seems to be fine at deep depths, but on the surface, sluggish squid can't handle the waves and end up getting carried onto the shore. So here's the question. What's worse, going back into the water or suffering on land? Well, for someone from the subtropics, cold water is a killer, especially if you dive into it suddenly. So if you stumble upon a cold, lifeless squid stranded on the beach, putting it back into the water won't help much. Chances are it'll just end up in shock once more. It might die immediately, but more likely than not, it'll be washed back ashore by the waves unless you choose to release it further out. Basically, it's a pointless thing to do. Answering the question of which death is more agonizing, on land or in water, it's actually not so easy. One reason is that scientists couldn't accurately determine for a long time whether invertebrate animals like squid, crabs, and lobsters can even feel pain. Eventually, it was found out that cephalopods do have nociceptors, nerve endings that quickly transmit potentially damaging stimuli to the central nervous system. According to another study, squid might feel something like pain, which even affects their behavior, making them more cautious. But it's still not a sure thing that squid can experience pain like humans, or at least like mammals in general. The main issue seems to be that scientists aren't paying enough attention to squid for some reason. Maybe it's because octopuses exist. They're way more fascinating creatures and happen to be relatives of squid. Both of them are cephalopods, and since they're related, let's take a look at what octopuses have to offer. For a while, people thought that using cold was the most humane method to kill an octopus. This approach is being considered by the Spanish seafood company Nueva Pescanova, which plans to raise octopuses on farms. But this practice has been observed elsewhere too. To get the mollusk ready for someone's dinner table, it's thrown into an icy bath. Since octopuses can feel pain, this method of killing them is not humane, but rather cruel. First comes a stunning shock from the cold, followed by intense pain. After a few seconds of desperate attempts to escape, there's numbness as the cold spreads inward, rendering them unable to move but still able to think. So they remain scared until their consciousness fades. It's eerie. Squid probably feel the same way when the water around them suddenly gets cold. Let's clear one thing up. When transporting live Japanese flying squid, people put them into 8-gallon polyethylene bags filled with 1.3 gallons of seawater at a temperature of 32 to 34 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like they're in a sort of tranquilized state, and in such a condition, squid can endure for 10 hours without showing stress. It might all come down to the oxygen levels. What about life and death on land? Again, there's not enough data. Scientists aren't sure how long squid can survive out of water, so it's hard to say how long a squid stranded on the beach will suffer. It could be anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours. Moreover, on land, they experience stress and may suffer from physical injuries because they're simply not built for life outside the ocean. After all, squid breathe through gills, so they could eventually suffocate. So what's the takeaway here? When there's a sharp cold snap, whether on land or in the water, squid will suffer the same fate. The only difference is that in water, it'll take longer. But in the end, the squid will still end up back on shore. So there's no point in trying to rescue the poor creature by tossing it back into the cold water. Honestly, it looks like we can't save the squid that have washed ashore. At least not all of them. Remember, sometimes there are thousands of them, even if you try to take them back to where they were supposed to migrate. The ocean's temperature drops so rapidly that it quickly kills off squid. In other words, most of the animals washed ashore are already dead. There's no saving them at that point. Even if the squid are still alive, the sudden temperature plunge could have caused internal damage, which also leaves them with no chance of survival. If squid happen to find themselves on dry land in a coma-like state, maybe from being transported, there's still a way to help them. However, it's important to act lightning fast before irreversible consequences like suffocation and atmospheric pressure start taking effect on the squid's soft bodies. The problem is that it's physically impossible to predict where, when, and how many squid will wash ashore to quickly get there and save them. Sure, there are times when squid get some help. Back in 2017, a squid of Onychia robusta species washed up on the shore of one of the Aleutian Islands. Luckily, it was still alive when a vet stumbled upon it. She managed to drag it back to deeper waters, and off it swam on its own. But this squid isn't your typical Japanese flying squid. Nobody knows why it ended up on the beach or what happened to it after it was rescued. Actually, squid don't always need help. There are times when they've simply fulfilled their biological role and are ready to die. When people stumble upon dead squid washed up on the shore, they tend to see it as a tragedy. But some types of squid live fast and die young, doing so for the sake of their offspring. The risk of dying between 2 reproductive cycles is too high, so these animals simply go all out at one point, devoting themselves entirely to their offspring, and then they die. They just exhaust themselves, and that's how nature intended it. It's all part of the normal life cycle, so there's really no point in trying to save these squid. They're not planning on living any longer anyway. Sometimes trying to rescue a stranded squid can not only be pointless, but also seriously risky. A guy was strolling along Lanikai Beach in Hawaii when he noticed a squid lying on the sand. He picked it up to take a closer look, only to find out the squid was alive and it bit him strong enough to draw blood. It took him a while to just pry the creature off his hand. By the way, squid carry toxin. While this toxin isn't harmful to humans, getting bitten still isn't exactly enjoyable.
It's actually God damn me, this
Okay, we can't throw them back into the sea, and saving them isn't an option either. So what do we do with these thousands of squid? Eat them? Actually, not a bad idea. When thousands of squid washed up on the shores of Sakhalin, locals were thrilled. Without waiting for checks or explanations on why there were so many squid on the beach, people rushed to collect them. They skipped work, took sacks full of mollusks, some even filled whole trucks. The risk of poisoning didn't even scare anyone. Perhaps only the more cautious folks of Sakhalin would gather squid that were still moving, ensuring they were definitely fresh. However, most people just took them all. This was despite local authorities urging to send samples to toxicologists in such cases. Squid can be food for both humans and animals, not to mention they can be sold. So why let good squid go to waste while scientists carry out tests? There's probably only one squid species you could try to save if you find it alive on the beach. It's the Humboldt squid we mentioned earlier. Just a reminder, these massive creatures live up in the northern latitudes and at great depths where it's not just cold but also low on oxygen. Still, Humboldt squid can slow down their metabolism so they hardly need any oxygen. It's pretty simple. When a squid finds itself in an environment with low oxygen levels, it slows down its energy usage. By using less fuel, it also reduces the amount of oxygen needed to kickstart this process. You catch the idea here? If a Humboldt squid can switch its body into a low oxygen mode by slowing down its metabolism, then it could potentially survive out of water for a bit. It might not last long, but in theory it could buy enough time for someone to spot it on the beach. After all, these squid are pretty big and hard to miss. Just a heads up, these are just our guesses. For some reason, scientists haven't given any info on how long squid can survive out of water. Alright, let's say we're not dealing with a bunch of tiny squid, but one huge one, like a Humboldt squid. What do we do with it? Drag it back into the water? Definitely not on your own, mainly because, as mentioned before, a squid stranded on shore might have injuries that could be fatal. Putting such an animal back in the water might only prolong its suffering. A great example would be the massive squid found on the coast of South Africa. The creature, measuring around 11 feet long, was already dead, seemingly washed ashore after sustaining injuries. It probably collided with a commercial or fishing vessel, as there was a long wound on its body that could have been caused by a propeller. The squid was near the surface when the ship hit it, and then the weakened creature was just carried ashore. Returning it to the water wouldn't have made a difference. Well, it would have made a sumptuous feast for other marine animals. However, there are other reasons why it's not a good idea to try to haul giant squid back into the sea, whether they're alive or dead. Each giant squid found on land is an opportunity for scientists to learn more about these creatures, because as you've probably realized, humanity knows very little about squid. It's as if all we know about them is how to cook them. Other information not related to recipes or calorie content is obtained from the carcasses of squid found on beaches. Whales also contribute a bit by feasting on squid and then dying. You can glean some insights from the remnants in their stomachs, although only fragments of squid remain. But that's all there is. I mean, all there is. Giant squid live at enormous depths, and people seldom encounter them, let alone thoroughly investigate them. To give you an idea of how crazy it is, the first photos of a live giant squid were only taken in 2004, and video footage didn't come until later, in 2013. Keep in mind, Aristotle was writing about these creatures way back in the 4th century BC. That's how stories about krakens come to be. When you know there's something huge with tentacles living in the ocean, but you have no clue what it is, it's easy to get scared. So if you happen to stumble upon a giant squid of any kind while strolling along the beach, it's best to report the finding somewhere and let the experts figure out what to do with it. Squid problems are handled by different entities in different countries, and the destiny of these sea creatures can also differ. For instance, if the body is well preserved, it might even end up in a museum, just like it happened with the Natural History Museum in London. They offered the museum a squid back in 2004, and it was almost intact, plus it was a whopping 28 feet long. Basically, it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. Moreover, most other well-known remains of giant squid consist of fragments washed up on beaches or found in the stomach contents of sperm whales. The London giant was accidentally caught by a fishing trawler, so scientists got the whole squid. Even over in Africa, they've got their own museum featuring a whole section for invertebrate critters. Their collection already includes 20 enormous squid, and the largest of the bunch measures a staggering 30 feet in length. In 2022, a massive squid carcass, partly buried in the sand, was discovered in New Zealand. The tourists who stumbled upon it were totally shocked, and you can see why. It's unclear how long the entire body of the dead squid was because most of its tentacles were bitten off. After snapping some photos, the tourists reported the find to New Zealand's Department of Conservation, who said they'd try to dig the remains out of the sand to take a closer look. But if you thought that the giant squid found on the beach could be used for something more interesting than just handing it over to scientists, like grilling it, then that's a terrible idea. And it's not just because we don't know exactly how long this squid has been dead on land. Giant squid have a high level of ammonia in their bodies, which helps them float. Eating them is simply impossible. The taste would be awful. Well, for humans anyway. Sperm whales, on the other hand, have no problem with it. See you later.